Hello, sweet friends. Today we are doing a jelly roll project. This is going to be a very fast and easy project that you can do in one day. I am using Sunshine and Chamomile by Poppie Cotton, and it is adorable. Look at all these cute prints, and I have one open right here. So here it is all rolled out. The only thing you're going to need is a mat, ruler, and rotary cutter, and you will be set to go. The pattern we're making today is called Barn Door by Poppie Cotton. It's super fast, super scrappy, and so adorable. If you would like to make this adorable quilt, I will send you this printed pattern absolutely free with a purchase of Sunshine and Chamomile from our shop. That's the Quilters Candy Shop at www.thequilterscandyshop.com. That's SHOPPE shop.com. Purchase one of these Sunshine and Chamomile Rolos, and I will send you this printed pattern absolutely free. All right, let's get to making something sweet. Now, this pattern calls for a jelly roll, but you only need 40 strips. So you have some options. You can unroll this and take one color out altogether, or you can take one of yellow and one navy out and not use it, or you can go ahead and do what I'm going to do, and that is cut all of them and then decide which ones I'm going to use in my squares. But that is completely up to you. If you want to save out 2 strips so you can use it in another project, you could do that right from the start. To make the best use of those extra strips, I'm actually going to add 3 more fat quarters. That way I'm going to use the 2 extra strips that are in this jelly roll, and I'm going to make a couple extra blocks. This pattern lays out the blocks 5 by 5, making a square, and I prefer an oblong block, so I think this should give me a 5 by 6 layout, and that will make me happier. And it gives me a few more pieces to put into the mix. But you don't have to do that. That's just something I'm going to do that's a little extra. Okay, so the first step is to separate these by color. Just because it's scrappy, you do want to have a little bit of control in that you want to be able to spread out the colors. And so I'm just going to make kind of obvious piles here. So put these yellows together, whites. All these yellows. There's only this one blue, or light blue, so I think I'm just going to leave it in with the blues. And I got yellows, light and dark, a little bit of red, some pink, and some white. I'm going to take this Rolo from Poppie Cotton, has 42 pieces, yes, and then it's actually 21 prints that is duplicated. So there are 2 strips the same, so I'm just going to cut that at the same time. So the first step in the pattern is to cut your strips into 8.5 inch long pieces by the 2.5 inch width of the strip. So the traditional way to do this to save time is you leave your strip, fold it in half, and you just trim off the selvage and then trim your 8.5 by 8.5. You need to get 5 pieces out of this strip, but it's not long enough. This is all the selvage I took off of there. Here's 8.5, 8.5, and then this, when you measure it, I could not get 8.5. I could only get 8. And that is not going to work. Fortunately, I have some of this fabric in yardage, so I'll be able to cut myself a couple of 8.5 inch pieces. Here's the trick, and hopefully you can see this. On the end of the fabric, of course, is our selvage edge, and it is woven a little tighter. That's to hold all the fabric nice and taut and not so it won't stretch out. And so you don't want that in your quilt whenever possible. Inside the selvage edge are these little holes, and those are the teeth marks where the fabric is pushed onto these prongs to run through the printer. That is regular fabric, so it has the same value as the rest of our fabric, different than the selvage edge. But of course you don't want those holes in your quilt top if you can avoid it. So what we're going to have to do is be very creative with our cutting and trimming. So on this edge, you can see the white print of the selvage actually comes up into the print. Here's the holes, which is still good fabric, and then the selvage edge. We're going to have to steal some of this fabric back. And by that, I mean putting on the line in here into the printed part, the white print that you would normally call selvage and you would cut off. You're going to have to take at least 1/8 of an inch of that, maybe a full wide 1/8 of an inch, but as long as it's inside your 1/4 inch seam line, no one will see it and it will not affect your pieces because it is the same fabric. It's only this outer edge, and you can see the difference between it. Okay, so that's going to have to be where I cut. I want to make sure this is straight. I'm using a 9.5 inch square, which is going to give me a really good measuring cut for my pieces. All right, so once that's done, I'm going to flip it this way just for ease and so you can see. I'm going to put my 8.5 inch mark on my cut, and I'm going to use one of my lines here on my ruler to line up along the fabric. That's going to give me my 8.5 and cut. That's going to go aside. So you're going to have to cut these single, which is so annoying in all of our advancements in quilting. This is not the way we do it anymore, but you're going to have to for this one if you want to get it all. So Poppie Cotton's fabric is a little narrower, and there are some other people's too that are narrower. It used to be, we called these goods, these printed goods, we used to call them 45s because they were 45 inch wide. But once we started going to wet printing, and then the fabric actually shrinks during the printing process, which is why you don't get as much shrinkage in your quilts anymore, and you don't have to pre-wash your fabric. So that's a plus, but we do lose a little bit of quilting fabric. Okay, here I am down to the end. So fabrics these days are now like 40, 41, 42 at the widest. If you find a 43, you're in heaven. All right, so now because I went and got this into that print a little bit, I've got enough here. Even though the holes are right along this edge and just inside in the seam allowance, but not past the seam allowance. So I'm good to go. So you can see this is going to be, I don't know if you can see it. There's the holes. So, but it's just like 1/8 of an inch. So it's well inside my seam allowance. All right, well, I'm going to continue to cut these single layer all the way through. It's going to take me quite a little bit. I will meet you right back here when I have all these cut. Okay, as I'm cutting my stacks, I'm keeping the colors separate so I can play with those. But I did find, so if you line this one up, you can line up this big selvage printed edge like that. And so I'm going to do there's 2 per color, and I'm going to do 2 colors. And then I'll just do it that way. If you're an experienced quilter, you can do more. But that's really what I would recommend, is just 2 colors at a time. That way you can get them lined up really nice. So, like this one curled under. You don't want that, or it'll be a problem. Because we need every millimeter of this fabric that we can get. Okay. So there we go. So it takes a little time, it's a little fiddly, and you want to get those as straight as possible. And then you can take and line up one of your lines with the bottom edge and slide it all the way over. And then right here, hopefully you can see this, I'm sliding this in and I'm putting the printed line on that 1/8 of an inch mark, making sure it's square, and then cutting that off. Now that's the proper way to cut off and not crossing over yourself. And now with this fresh edge, I can put that on the 8.5 and keep this line going across here. That one, 8.5. Line this up because that's how we're keeping it straight, and then this edge for the measure, and cut it, and then stack it up. Then if you take what's left over, hold it up like this and just kind of pat those little edges into place. You can get it pretty good. You can always do a little detail work down here on the table, but holding it up there really does work. Okay, then put that 8.5 right there. Make sure it's 8.5. There is no room for error in this particular pattern, so in that case maybe it's a little beyond beginner, but really the whole thing is very simple. You just have to take your time and really pay attention and make very accurate and thoughtful decisions and actions. My mother's always been trying to get me to make thoughtful decisions and actions. It never took when I was a kid, and I don't think it's taking now, but we're going to see what we can do. Okay, and then the last cut down here, and now you can see it gives you just enough on this end with your selvages. Okay, so I will do the next couple and keep moving on. Okay, and here I've cut my 2 extra pieces that I couldn't get out of my strips because of not cutting them singly. So I'm just going to toss those on top. So I have my blues, yellows, reds, pinks, and whites all cut, and now we're going to start sewing. Now this is a scrappy quilt, so you're just randomly going to pull pieces together, and you're going to get 4 strips. You pull 4 strips together, and you're going to sew these 4 strips. So flip this over, scant 1/4 inch and a scant 1/4 inch. Okay, and here are my 2 pieces, and now we're going to sew this together with a scant 1/4 inch, and there it is. It is a single block made from 4 strips, and you're going to make 50 of these blocks. Now the pattern calls for pressing your seams to one side, but when you see how this pattern is going to go together, it's going to make your seam allowances go all random in so many different directions that it's going to be really difficult to press and handle and sew and keep things from twisting. So I recommend that you press your seams open like this, and that is just going to make everything lie flat, and when you're stitching across you'll be able to manage these seam allowances a little better with 0 bulk. If you have a directional fabric, for example, I've got this one that's got cows and chickens and flowers and strawberries, but they're directional. It doesn't matter if I put it this way or this way, and it won't matter in the quilt because these blocks go all different ways. There's nothing that you have to worry about directional. So if you have a directional fabric, do not worry about it. Okay, I'm going to continue to make blocks, and when I get all 50 of my blocks made, I will be right back. I know this is supposed to be a scrappy quilt, but I'm really not that good at scrappy, and I did try to do it very randomly, but it made my brain hurt. So what I ended up doing was making sets of 4 that I really liked. And by the time I got to the end, then I knew that I was going to have blocks that had lights and darks and didn't have the same print in it too much. And it made me much happier to be just a little bit more organized. So as you know, they call that organized scrappy. I call it OCD. So when you see how we're going to cut this, you're going to recognize that it really doesn't matter. I can sew these exactly this way, the whole stack, and by the time I'm done, you'll never know that I did it that way. Okay, well, these are the last pieces I have to sew, and then we're going to put our strip blocks together. In the pattern, it says to not worry about squaring up your blocks at any stage, because we're going to be cutting these on the diagonal, and there's going to be lots of give in the pieces. But I found I do recommend squaring all your blocks before going on to the next step. If you have really good seam allowances, you went scant and they all line up, your center line should be 4 1/4, and that will make 8 1/2 all the way around. But nobody's seam allowances are perfect. So if you have to change the size, this is the time. To square up your block a little smaller, I would only trim off 1/4 inch. To do that, move your center seam line to 4 1/8 inches and trim all the way around. Do this to all of your blocks and then you can continue. Okay, I've pulled aside 2 different strip block sets. And I am going to partner all of these together because I have 6 strip block sets. If you did not add the 3 fat quarters, you only have 5 sets, which means you'll have to randomly put all your block pairs together. But since I have 6, I can put these 2 together and then another 2 together and another 2 together. They're going to come out even and I don't have to worry about it. So you're going to take your first block is going to lie on the vertical, and then a block from the other pile is going to be put right sides together on the horizontal. We're going to sew all the way around this block a scant 1/4 inch. Just go ahead and match up this edge, which is the edge we're going to sew, because it's got the flat side here, and we're going to sew right across these seam allowances so we can manage them. Take it to the sewing machine and you're going to give it a scant 1/4 inch. So I'm using my diagonal tape to keep everything in alignment. And by having the seam allowances on top, I can easily manage those. And because I press them open, they go right through. And you're going to sew all the way off. For speed, I'm just going to use a cottontail thread saver to get me off of this block. And then you're going to go to the opposite side and do the same thing. So I'm going to now stick this through scant 1/4 inch and go all the way down again. I'm going to sew right off the block. So now I'm going to turn my block over so that I put this flat side on the bottom, and I'm going to sew both of these lines. And then turn it around and do the other side. Watch those seam allowances. And sew right off the block. And now you've got all 4 edges are sewn together. And set it aside and we'll do all the cutting at one time. Alright, here I have all my sewn blocks. vertical block and a horizontal block face to face, sewn all the way around on all 4 sides. And you should have 25 of these little partners. All right, I'm going to set this aside. For this next step, again, you need a cutting mat, your rotary cutter, and a longer ruler that has a 45-degree angle line so that you can cut these corner to corner. Make sure you're not just lining up the corner of your fabric, but really you're lining up the corner of your stitching where your seams come together. And this line, make sure you've got a true 45-degree angle. So you're going to cut across twice, once this way and once this way. So again, I'm going to line up my 45 on my seam allowance. I'm going to make sure my ruler is going from corner to corner of my seam line, and then cut. And if you're fancy enough to have a rotating mat, this is the perfect time to use it. But let's take a look at what we've got. Look at these little cutie blocks. And now you can see why it just doesn't matter how you put your blocks together, because it is really going to be random and scrappy. You're going to turn 2 of the blocks so that you get this square being made like this. You can also take and move these around. Like if I really wanted that to go like this, so that I have that blue across from each other, that's completely on you. That's the creative part. You can do that however you like. The only thing I would suggest that is not mentioned in the pattern, that 2 of them press this way, and then these 2 press this way across those seams like this. So the seam allowance is going out on the other 2. This seam you don't have to worry about because we've already pressed this one open. So it's going to lay however you pin it. But this one, when you go to sew this together now, you'll be able to see this seam allowance on the back will go one way and this will go the other. And that will make your life much easier for getting nice pretty points in this very scrappy quilt. All right, so the first thing to do is to get all of these blocks cut into quarter and pressed with half of them going with the seam allowance towards the seams and half of them going with the seam allowance away from the seams. And if you do that block by block, that is going to save you a lot of time. Well, I'm going to get these cut, pressed, and sewn, and we'll come right back. Okay, I went ahead and brought over those 2 blocks that I just cut for you so you can see how I'm going to press this in real time. I'm going to lay it out first. So that one's going there, and I want the other blue across from it. Then that would mean this one would have to go here, and this would have to go here. Now's the time to rearrange if I wanted to put it in a different place, but I think I'm fine with this. So these 2, I am going to press this way towards the center, just like that. And that's the easiest way to press it. It really wants to lay that way anyway. Be very, very careful in your pressing at this time, because we cut these on the diagonal. It means all of these edges are on the bias and they can stretch very easily. So the minimal amount of moving and touching is desired. But we're going to get this pressed out here. But because it's on the bias, it also means that it's very forgiving, very easy to get things lined up. At this point, I would not square these blocks because we don't want to distort them. Okay, these are the other ones. So the way we're going to do this, set this seam. You'll probably notice I didn't set the other seam. That was a mistake. I should have done. But since this wants to fold that way, it's not as bad. This one does not want to fold this way. So it's going to be really important to set that seam so it relaxes and you get a little heat in here, which is going to make this bending over the top of itself much easier. And then look at that. It's just going to press out beautiful. Yes. Excellent. Okay, great. That looks so good. Okay, so this one is the other one. I'm going to set that seam, and then I want the lines going this way. I want it to flip over on top of itself. So I'm just going to give it a little help in that center seam and right here on this seam line to open up, and then very gently just press that into position. That's perfect. All right. Now, with these seams pressed this way, when I sew this one to this one, I can nest I can feel right here and nest those two seams. And now I'll sew. Well, now I flipped it around so many times. Put it back. Don't lose the side that you're gonna sew. Okay, this one goes here, this one goes here. So I'm gonna pull this over like this. I'm gonna nest these seams right here so I don't lose my place, and then make sure everything lines up pretty and sew my scant 1/4 inch. So wow, look at that. Very nice. Okay, my points match here and my points match here. So now I'm going to do this, fold this over like this and nest this seam. This is the first most important part. Get this seam nested, perfectly lined up, and then check right here to make sure these 2 points are going to come together. And then this is the seam that I'm going to sew right here. Now we're going to put this on here, nest this seam, and make sure this point is going to come together. So pull this back. There's my point. Look at that. It's going to be perfect. So this is the seam we're going to sew. So we want to make sure everything here lines up as well. This should nest in this corner also. So that's how we're going to do it. All right, let's see how this turned out. Now, see how wavy it is? Because it's biased, but it'll be fine. Use your iron to press that seam, set it, and then it'll really go back into shape here in a second. Okay, that looks so good. All right, and then you're going to spin your seam allowances, and as we've done in our previous quilt sew alongs, you just pop that apart like that. If you've got these little threads, they generally will just pull right out or pop right out. Sometimes you might have to snip it, but it's no problem. All right, and then because this is bias, I'm not going to pull on these too much. I'm just going to get a good set right here first. And then I'm going to do my really good pressing from the front side. And that is going to help all those seam allowances go the right direction. So remember early on, I said instead of pressing those seam allowances, look at all of these seams. They would all be going different directions, and pressing this would be really difficult. So that's why I recommended pressing all of these open, and look how flat everything's going to lay now. All right, and now you've got this. These are pressed over, but this is going to be very helpful with the center. And look how darling it is. Here we have the blocks put together, and you can see they're a little wavy. and very flimsy. So what I recommend before we go to square these up is just a little spray starch. I use this, it's from Walmart, it's great. No offense to Mary Ellen's Best Press, I really do like it, and I love the smell of it, especially the lavender one. This smells perfectly fresh, and it saves me a lot of money. So that's what I'm using. So a little bit of starch, just like that, and now look, it gives the block a little stability. See, I can pick it up almost as a whole. And it's going to help to keep these edges from getting any more stretched out than they already are. So now we're going to take this and square them up. So let's square up these blocks. The squaring up process is very easy. The block should be a 10.5-inch square, and if you use a 12.5-inch ruler, it'll be really easy to square this up. So let me just talk about the basics first. The way to square up this block is to put your 5.25-inch line right down the center seam here, and your 5.25-inch line right across your center horizontal line. That alone is going to be very helpful as a start. But the most important part of this quilt is getting the points on the sides of your block with plenty of room for a seam allowance. If you have one of your seam allowances that is too short and you've got ample on the other side, just shift it, just adjust it. It's not going to show, and the points are more important. To that end, if you need to shift your ruler left and right so your center line is not exactly center, or up and down so your center line is not exactly center, it's okay. With the scrappiness of this quilt, that is not going to show. Another tip would be that you can use your diagonal line, your 45-degree line, to line up on these seams here. That will also keep everything nice and square. If your block is a little trapezoid shape, you can twist your ruler a little bit to fit that trapezoid shape. As long as it's not more than 1/8 of an inch off across this center, it will not show. All right, hold down your ruler nice and tight and just trim those little skinny bits off the right hand and left hand side. All right, now there's the top and the right side. I'm just going to rotate this 180 degrees. And now that I've made that first cut, all I have to do is line up this left and bottom edge with my 10.5-inch measure on my ruler, and whatever is over here is just going to be good enough. Just like that. All right, hardly anything. Perfect. All right, sweet friends, here we are down to the final step, and that is putting our blocks together. Now, I tried going through these blocks and seeing if I could see anything that would need particular attention for laying out. I even tried to make like a darker pile and a lighter pile, but really, as you can see, they all have the same value. So other than actual prints touching each other, there's nothing you have to worry about. So this is going to be the fastest layout ever. All right, for your top row, you're just going to need 5 blocks across. One, two, three, 4, and my table's not quite big enough for 5, but we'll make it work. So there's 5, and 5 blocks down. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, and then you just fill in. Now, if you recall earlier on, I added this and these two. So I actually have 6 long, and so I'm going to go 5 by 6, but your layout should be 5 by 5 for a square. All right, so there's the basic layout. I really don't see where I need to do any switching. Maybe this polka dot. I'm going to switch this one for this one right here. Boom, like that. Spread that out, but oh my gosh, it's so cute. All right, the way we put this together is you're going to first sew these 5 pieces together, and then you're going to sew these 5, and you're going to make all your rows. Then you're going to sew your rows together, and that's it. We'll come back when we're done with that. Okay, here is my second row, and that looks so cute. So now I'm going to sew these 2 rows together, and what I will probably do is I'll make another 2 rows to sew together, and then another 2 rows and sew together, and then I'll have 3 sections to sew together to make my top. All right, so when I get that part done, I'll meet you right back here. Okay, and here it is. I think it turned out so great. Now, just a few little details to go over with you. In the pattern, it says the unfinished door quilt block is going to be 11 inches. When I did mine and I squared it up, it came out to 10.5. So that's fine. And so that means my finished barn door block is 10 inches. It also means up here where it says that it's a 51.5 square, mine came out to 50.5 square. So this is because there is so much bias in the quilt. It really doesn't matter. You can do a lot more squaring along the way and make it even smaller, or you can leave it without any squaring and have slightly larger blocks. That is completely up to you. As this is a scrappy quilt, it's not going to make any difference. So one thing I want to do is put on a border. Number one, to keep this from stretching any further out of shape, but also because I have these 2 fabrics from the collection that I think are absolutely adorable. So I'm going to do an inner border with the light and a little wider outer border with this denim flower. And I think it's going to make it look all that much more country. All right, let's see what it looks like. Oh my gosh, and here it is, my sweet friends. I am so happy with the border. I really am so glad I made the choice that I made. If you buy one of our Sunshine and Chamomile jelly rolls and you would like the border kit along with it, I will add the instructions for the border onto the pattern, and you'll get the pattern for free, printed and with your package. That's it for today. I got to get this packaged up and sent to my quilter so she can do something really cute. What a great picnic table this will make, or 4th of July. How about that? This is going to be a great summer quilt, and I hope you'll give it a try too. Now, go make something sweet. Thanks for joining us at the Quilters Candy Shop. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe for more fun quilt projects like this.